Hi, I'm Ramirez for Raven Studios, and this is just the overview video. For the full in-depth breakdown, head over to theravenstudios.com where you'll find the full video plus loads of other content to level up your music production. Today, we're diving into subbase, what it is, how to design it, shape it, control it, and make sure it actually hits on every system, whether you're making house, down-tempo, or anything in between. If your low end isn't right, your whole track suffers. So let's fix that. Let's go deep, literally. Okay, here we are in Ableton. Now, apologise for any noise that you can hear around me. It's a rather hot day today, and this I don't have the luxury of air conditioning. The beauty of living in London, right? For those 3 days that you need it of the year. So, yes, apologise for any noise that you might be able to pick up on the microphone around this. Now, we're going to get into creating subbase. Subbase is one of the hardest things to achieve for a number of reasons, but I think with a bit of understanding about how to achieve it, what it is, and the best way to go about it, once you get your head around it, it'll give you some sort of a head start into creating subbase. Imagine creating subbase on a system without this kind of knowledge would be really quite difficult, and you might end up making a little bit of a mess of it. So we're going to go back to the basics here, and I'm going to sort of give you the fundamentals of subbase, and bass in general, actually, and that should help you moving forwards. Now, we're just going to focus on sub. I'm not going to be talking about mid-bass or the sort of sound design of mid-bass. It's just sub. Sorry if you've seen this already, but I'm going to be using this in a context of the sort of kind of music that I make. Talking of which, I've just created a very simple drum groove here. It's more on the sort of 90s tip. I'll just give you a snippet. There is a track that's going to come together out of this, but for now, we'll just use the drums. Kind of breakbeaty sort of thing. Right, so let's get into subbase. I am using Ableton, of course. Now, you can see here I've got operator. Now, why operator? Well, operator's great for demonstrating subbase because it defaults with a sine wave sound. Now, I'm also going to use Pro Q4 here, so I'm going to open up this one. Now, before we get into it, when I was talking to my drum and bass friends, I've got a few of them, and I asked the question, what is the best key to write bass in? Now, key, I'm not talking about your house keys, I'm talking about musical keys, you know, from C to C. There is generally the same answer from every one of them. And the key is, well, we'll get into it now. Why does key matter? Well, I'll show you, because the key, the note in which you play your bass will give you a different frequency. And we definitely need to cover, for sub-bass, we need to cover certain frequencies. So let's look at that. I'm going to split up this is very crude, by the way. I'm going to change this. I'm not going to go into great detail here. You can learn a bit more about that on the Raven Studios site. But I'm just going to split this up. 60 hertz there, up to 300 there. Again, this is just crude. Now, 60 hertz down to 20 hertz, which is the sort of the range. 20 hertz is supposed to be the range of human hearing, although you can still feel it below 20 hertz. Now, 60 hertz to 20 hertz is that area there is the sub frequency, right? Okay, that's the frequency that you feel. You feel it in your stomach. It flaps your trousers. It shakes your neighbor's teeth. It's the sort of brown noise. That's the sub. It's the feeling. It's the kind of, you know, it gives you the emotion. You might not necessarily be able to hear it on a phone speaker, but sub is something that you kind of, you know, you feel, especially in a club, making house music like I do. Sub on a big system can literally rattle your teeth, right? So, but the problem is with sub is that if you don't have any frequencies above 60 hertz, then there's a good chance you're likely not to be able to hear it on something like a phone or a Bluetooth speaker or you know, small earbuds. Even these don't go down that low. These are pretty good studio headphones. So subbase is great and all. We need to sort of cover those frequencies between 60 and 20 hertz, but we also need to be able to hear the bass, okay? Because there's no good creating a really thunderous sub bass line that you just can't hear anywhere. You can only hear it, you can only feel it, you can't hear it. So let's look at that. Firstly, though, we want to let's sort of look at what note works best for sub. So I'm just going to go over to this here and open this up here. I'm going to play some notes on my piano roll using the default operator sound, which defaults with a sine wave. Okay, what is a sound? So I'm going to play C3 and you'll see what happens. Look at that. Now C3, I think there's a transpose on here, so let me bring it down. I'm just going to take that off. Yes, the transpose is there for a reason, actually. So let's go back to this. If I play C3, look at the frequency. It's up there. It's up just above, just below 300. It's around about 300 hertz. And you can see it's a very specific, and that is what's known as the fundamental. It's just playing the note. Let's go down an octave, which is down to the C2. Where does that sit? That sits there in between, I don't know what frequency that is. It's roughly around about, let's have a look. Let's catch it before it dies. It's about 120 hertz. Yeah, okay. Now that is not bass. We need to get it into this region here. So let's go down to C1. Okay, we're getting somewhere, right? But still, look, we're right on the edge of that sub-bass frequency, okay? It's right at 60 hertz. We're not into this sub-range. Let's go down to C0. Let's see what happens. Oh, look. I mean, that is like flapping my head inside my headphones, but that is too low because that is not a frequency you can hear. That would literally, that's going into that subsonic range as well, look. Down there. So let's move up, and I'll go up a note at a time and we'll see. What we're looking for is to get that note that sits in between there like that. So C sharp, get better, D. Okay, so that's in there, yeah. D sharp, that's cool. E, look at that. F. Now F is the note that the drum and bass producers like to work in because of this reason. Look, it covers all of those frequencies in between 60 and 20. Look at that. Now, you can go up even higher, go F sharp, still got that there. G, yep. G sharp, yep. A, yep. A sharp, and then B. B is right on the edge. So, what do we get from this? We get the fact that C is probably too high or too low. So, not the best note to write your bass line in. Now, D, C sharp, definitely sort of still too low. D, you could argue you could get away with. But the optimum note for me is F. So you can go anywhere between F and B. And that will be still within that subsonic range. Okay. So next up, we want to know, right, so we've got our sub covered. How do we get those frequencies in there? Well, with operator, we can simply do this. If we turn this into this mode, we get 4 discrete oscillators. Turn that mode on there, and we get 4 separate oscillators. I'll turn up the level of this one, bring the envelope up, and I'm going to increase the coarse octave by 1. So that is an octave above. And look what we get now. If I play that same note of F, look. We've got exactly double the frequency. So it's 60 and 120. We're into that range there, and that's the range that you can hear on speakers. Let me make a sort of simple offbeat bass line in F just to demonstrate this, and then we can go from there. So if I go that, okay. Okay, you can hear that. If I take that oscillator off, it's there. You can feel it, hopefully. I don't think you'll be able to hear it because most of you will be looking on a phone or whatever, a laptop or something. But when you bring this one in, so that's your first trick. So we've got our sub frequency covered, but by adding that extra octave above, using the same sine wave, we've brought in these extra frequencies. These are what you can hear on a phone. So that's one way of creating an audible sub, okay? The next way to create an audible sub is to just have one oscillator, but use distortion. Now, you can use distortion within the operator itself. How do we do that? Well, we change this to MS2 mode. And then look, as I do that, look here, we get filter drive that appears. MS2 mode, boom, filter drive. What is filter drive? Well, it's distortion. Look what happens as I bring it in. Let me solo it so we can hear it. Sounds nasty, but we're bringing in those extra frequencies. Look, it's starting to fill up those frequencies between 60 and 300, which is just sort of bass that's audible. Like that. And what you can do, you can then use the filter to filter the frequencies out. Look at that. And you can use that to taste, using a bit of resonance as well. Then you've got an audible. So that's another way of bringing in those harmonics. Another way to bring in the harmonics is to take this off altogether. I'll bring that down. It's to change the waveform. Now, a sine wave is a very sort of pure frequency. Look at it. It just contains the fundamental, just the note that's playing. Now, if we change this from a sine wave to a triangle, it's a combination of a square wave and a sine wave, which is a triangle, and it gives you those extra harmonics. Look at this. Okay, you've got these extra frequencies, which again you could then, look at that, brings those extra frequencies in, which arguably you could hear on small speakers. But not that much, okay? So the next one is to look at the different waveform, which would be a square wave. If I go square 64, look, you can see all these harmonics show up in the actual operator itself. Look at the waveform when I play this. Very sort of hollow sounding, uneven harmonics are added, but it's adding in those extra harmonics, which you can then filter out. Which is quite strong sort of frequency content, which enables you to sort of pick out the note. There you go. That's another way of doing it. You can use something like, not only can you use a square wave, but you can use a sawtooth. Same sort of thing. Let me solo that again. Get a different sound because these are the even harmonics that it brings in. Look at that. You've got the fundamental, then you've got the double, then you've got half of that, etc., etc. These are even harmonics, giving you a pleasant sound. Again, filter it out. More audible sub bass. Now, I did promise that I was going to show you this track that I've made. So let's bring the track in. This is something that I sort of knocked up. It's sort of raavy kind of thing. This is the sound. So now you can really hear that bass. Okay, so let's show you how I did that. I'm going to create this. I'm going to copy this pattern over here. Right, operator bass. And first thing I'm going to do is bring it down an octave. Let's take a listen. Too high, so bring it down an octave. Second thing I'm going to do is increase the release because I want the sound to sort of decay a little bit. Now the release is there on the oscillator, so let's do that. Can you hear how they sort of overlap in each other? Well, and you now need to click this and make it monophonic. One voice, one note. So one note cuts the other one off. Now we can bring in a pitch envelope. What does a pitch envelope do? Well, it adds a sort of a high-pitched sweep on every note. And you can control it with the decay. Get the decay short enough and it creates like a thump at the beginning of the note, which again helps the note stick out. Okay, next thing we can do is we can bring in that second oscillator. Let's activate that. And then you've got a level control of that. We should be looking at the frequency of this while we're doing it, because look, without this oscillator, okay, bring this oscillator in. Okay, back to the filter. We'd already set this up because that's why there's quite a lot of harmonics in it already. So let's set up the filter. Get that. That's two oscillators, one tuned above the other one, both using, this time, the one is a sine wave, one is a sawtooth. Let's change that to a square wave. Okay, and because I've got it filtered, if I open that up, it'll sound horrible. But the filter enables me to bring in those harmonics above the fundamental, keeping the sub bass in there, but filtering out the nasty ones that we don't want. Oh, let me bring that in, excuse me. Okay, great. So we've got that. We've got a combination of all of those techniques. One oscillator an octave above the other. We've got some filter drive, which is essentially distortion, which is bringing in extra harmonics or filtering those harmonics out. What else can we do? Well, we can use a couple of these things. What we've got here, we've got vinyl distortion. This is a great one. This gives you a stereo distorted bass. I've set it so it's concentrating on the frequency down there at like 158 hertz. And if I bring the drive up, this is what happens. You get this stereo bass. Stereo bass, you say, cardinal sin. No, it's fine, because we can deal with it. Now, it sounds a little bit too distorted, so what can we do with that? Well, we can use another filter, which is here, look, the auto filter. If I can then do the same trick as what I did with operator, which is to filter out those added harmonics that we don't want there, like that. So suddenly getting this thunderous bass that's very audible because we've got all of these harmonics. We're not increasing the bass itself, we're increasing the harmonics in the bass above the sub-bass frequency. All right, now next thing we want to do is look at our EQ here, which we can do a little trick here, which is you've got the sidechain set there. So if I open this up, the sidechain is to the kick. If I open this up here and put the sidechain on, you'll be able to see the imprint of the kick coming through. And then what we can do there is we can set a dynamic point. We can open this up, we can go set it to the side chain, make this very quite thin, and then every time the kick hits, it will duck the frequency at that frequency that it clashes at. So it's frequency dependent dynamic EQ. Basically compression, but only when it hears the kick. It won't do it when the kick's not running. Okay, and then of course we could use kickstart to use for volume shaping, which is just a really quick, fun way of actually sidechaining the volume, not the frequency, the volume. Now I've got again set to the kick drum on the sidechain input, and I've changed the input to audio, so it reacts when it hears a kick. Okay, so now how do we know if that level is right? Well, this is where we reach for our span plugin. I've got a span on my main output here. And what I'm looking for is if I take the bass off for a minute, I don't want the bass to overtake the kick. The kick should be the star of the show. That should be sort of up at like around about -33. I'm saying, let's go here, operator demo, turn that off. Let's see where the kick hits. About 50 hertz at around about -33. You could argue it could go a bit louder, but when I bring in the bass line, I don't want it to overtake the kick. Let's see what happens. This is a visual representation of the sub itself. You can see that's too loud, so I need to bring that down to compensate for that added extra level that it's giving on top of the kick. The bass, in my opinion, shouldn't be as loud as the kick. It should be slightly underneath. So I'll bring that down and mix it in. That's very nice. Okay, now let's go back to the bassline itself, the operator demo there, and just look as well. I want to talk about the EQ here. Now, most people would reach for a low cut frequency there. Personally, and this is something that I kind of do, I don't use these on bass because it creates a phase shift at the cutoff frequency, which can often cause problems with the bass line. It can sort of weaken your bass and create phase issues between kick and bass line. So I tend to leave those off, and I'll do my low cut on the master channel, on the overall thing. Okay, so look, let's just take that off. So that's one thing to bear in mind. Okay, great. Now, if I bring in my synth, brilliant. Now, there's a tool here which I really like. I've got Master Plan by Music Hack, which is an amazing sort of one-stop mastering thing. But what I like about it as well, it's got the option to be able to check this little switch, which emulates it coming through a phone. And this is where it gets funky, because now you can hear whether or not you'll be able to hear it on your phone or your laptop. So let's check it on first on NS10s. Just about audible. Is it audible on the phone? No. Now, so what can we do about that to make it more audible? Well, that means we're going to have to bring in extra harmonics, less filtering potentially. That's it. By opening that filter, we've got less of the sort of sub, but we've brought in those extra harmonics. Hope you can hear that. I hope that's coming through. Another thing we can look at as well is changing the sort of emphasis. If I go to the Pro Q4, we can change the emphasis. You can see there's quite a strong sub-bass area there. We can bring that down with an EQ move, and then we can boost the frequency there. So we're going to boost there like that, and then maybe bring this down. I'll change this to a bell shape. Okay. So it sort of like readdresses the balance. Bell shape, so this is going to be brought down. Let's open that up a bit wider. Okay, now you can hear it coming through on this phone emulation, which is great little feature, isn't it? Now the secret is, well, when you turn that off, what does it sound like? Now, you might say, Dean, this is bringing in stereo bass. Right, so we can look at a few things of bringing in the bass line. We could put a utility on there. And hopefully, let's do that utility there. After the vinyl distortion, you can mono the bottom. Let's do the bass mono. Okay, so, you know, vinyl distortion is a subjective choice. You could use something like raw, for instance, which I've got set up here. Raw is very much, but rather than distorting the low frequencies, I'm going to distort the mid frequencies. Let's see what happens. So it's definitely a more mono sounding bass, but we're bringing out those frequencies between 60 and 300. Let's do our little master plan check. Does that help? You can hear those frequencies. Now, it will need a bit of tweaking, of course. You know, the sound isn't perfect. But if you want the full video, as I said before, head over to theravenstudios.com, where you can see the whole thing in its entirety from start to finish. Right, well, I hope that helped demystify sub-bass. Sub-bass is one of those things, if you get it wrong, you will completely screw up your whole track. You'll blow up subwoofers in a club, you'll flap the wrong trousers, and it'll be a complete mess. So it's a real careful thing to work with. I would suggest that you sort of use, you know, span plugins, metering plugins to help you with that. And also, as well, don't necessarily trust your monitors. I've got great monitors in here, but my room's not great. So it's a combination of things, really, but metering certainly helps. Anyway, I hope that helped. If you enjoyed the video, give me a thumbs up and a like. And if you want to see more of these, subscribe.